courageous advocacy for God's prophet. Courageous advocacy or support for God's prophet. The rescue of Jeremiah. The royal official Ebed-Melech, an Ethiopian, heard about Jeremiah's plight. He courageously approached the king. We see that in verse 7. Now when Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs which was in the king's house, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the dungeon, the king then sitting in the gate of Benjamin. See, Ebed-Melech's actions highlight two key themes: courage and compassion. That's what you have to have. When he learned about Jeremiah's plight, he did not simply turn a blind eye, did he? Rather, he chose to act bravely, voicing his concerns to the king. This immediately calls our attention to the heart of the matter. Sometimes speaking up for someone in need requires us to risk our own position, our own safety sometimes, or even comfort. Ebed-Melech suggests a personal commitment to helping Jeremiah, reflecting the heart of God towards those suffering injustice. So in the midst of conflict and the struggle for power, Ebed-Melech stands out as a beacon of hope. He is a foreigner in the royal court, yet he displays remarkable loyalty to Jeremiah. He's a fellow believer in God. This shows us that God's work is not limited to a certain group of people. It's not limited to a race, ethnicity, or nationality. God's calls for compassion and justice extend to everyone who wishes to heed them. Ebed-Melech chooses empathy over indifference, and in doing so, he serves as an example for us all. So he charged the officials with a serious injustice. Verse 8 says, Ebed-Melech went forth out of the king's house and spake to the king, saying, Jeremiah went up in his plains preaching. He just kept on preaching. The princes went on in their matter. See, some listen sometimes and some just won't listen. It is common for wicked people to look upon God's faithful ministers as enemies because they show what enemies the wicked are to themselves while impenitent. Jeremiah was put into a dungeon or a prison. Many of God's faithful witnesses have been privately made away in prison. There's no excuse. Sometimes God can still make a way for you to speak on his behalf, no matter where you are. The verse mentions Ebed-Melech's identity as an Ethiopian eunuch. This detail is not merely an introduction, but serves to remind us that God's reach transcends nationality and social status. Ebed-Melech was likely viewed as an outsider, yet he stepped up when it mattered most. This encouraged us to break down barriers, acknowledging that anyone can be used for God's purposes. Don't ever put yourself down on anyone else. He pled for the prophet's life, informed the king that Jeremiah would soon starve to death in the cistern or the dungeon. Verse 9 said, My Lord, the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they have cast into the dungeon. And he is like to die for hunger in the place where he is, for as there is no more bread in the city. In this verse, we find Jeremiah in a dire situation. He has been cast into a dungeon and is facing the very real threat of starving to death. He has been cast into this dungeon, and then his plight is brought to the attention of the king, who pleads with the king to intervene on Jeremiah's behalf. This verse serves as a glimpse into the suffering and persecution that Jeremiah endured for his role as a prophet and messenger. We are all messengers of God. Whether you're a preacher, teacher, or evangelist. We're all messengers of God. So we see wisdom in righteous action. The king immediately ordered a rescue attempt, assigned 30 of the royal guard to help Ebed-Melech save and protect Jeremiah. Verse 10 says, Then the king commanded Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian, saying, Take from hence 30 men with thee, and take up Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he die. He has been cast into a dungeon and is facing the very real threat of starving to death. His plight is brought to the attention of the king by an individual who pleads for him. So we see the king immediately ordered a rescue attempt. This verse starkly illustrates that no one, including a king, can fully control circumstances when God is involved. Zedekiah, despite being the ruler, reveals his vulnerability and demonstrates how power is sometimes elusive. The decision to let others decide Jeremiah's fate indicates that authority does not always protect one from making difficult choices. This is a significant lesson we should grasp. True leadership often involves yielding to God's will, even when the outcomes are uncertain. So we see the royal official took quick action in rescuing Jeremiah. Verse 11 says, So Ebed-Melech took the men with him and went into the house of the king under the treasury, and took thence old cast clouts and old rotten rags, and let them down by cords into the dungeon to Jeremiah. Look at the process here. He secured the gods. He rushed to his storage room and took some worn-out clothes. He rushed to the cistern of the dungeon and lowered the clothes on a rope to Jeremiah. The backdrop of this event is crucial. When Ebed-Melech steps forward to speak to the king, he is putting himself at risk. By advocating for Jeremiah, he goes against not just the popular sentiment of the day, but also the authority of the king. This speaks volumes about the character and moral compass of Ebed-Melech. He was a foreigner in a land under siege, yet he chose sympathy and empathy and justice over personal safety. So we see the third subtopic, compassion to deliverance. He instructed the prophet to put the clothes on his arms, to pad the ropes and keep them from burning him. Look at verse 12. And Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, said unto Jeremiah, Put now these old cast clouts and rotten rags under thine armholes, under the cords. And Jeremiah did so. Taking a stand requires courage. Ebed-Melech had to face potential backlash from the king and his advisors by speaking up for a condemned man. In our lives, there may be moments that require us to stand up for truth and justice, even if it puts us in uncomfortable situations. You don't always find the easy way out. We must foster a spirit of bravery, knowing that our voices can make a difference. One day you may need a voice on your behalf. When you can help someone, the Lord expects you to do just that. The prophet was rescued, but remained a prisoner. In verse 13. So they drew up Jeremiah with cords and took him up out of the dungeon, and Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. The act of lowering him into the cistern symbolizes the rejection he faced for speaking the truth. However, it also highlights God's sovereignty. Despite the physical hardships, this verse reminds us that God's plan will always come to fruition. He ensures that Jeremiah is lifted out and placed back in a safer environment. This is a powerful visual. It's a visual of God's promise to safeguard his prophets and his message, no matter the earthly opposition they face. When God puts it in your heart and mind that he wants you to go and do something, you go and do it. God has your back. You can always depend on that. When God's word goes out, nobody can stop it. You cannot muffle God's word. It's going to go out. If you don't do it, somebody else will. The principle. Sometimes all it takes is one person to change the course of another's life. Just like Ebed-Melech, we have the power to make a difference. That's a quote by Billy Graham. We have the power to make a difference, all of us. Don't ever cut yourself down. Don't ever put yourself down. Don't ever say that you don't have much to offer. You always have some place to go to spread God's word, and God expects you to do that. I want to thank you for being here. See you again next time.